The problem isn't that he humiliated me. The problem is that I remembered. My wife Rachel has been with Pierce Cybersecurity Solutions for about 3 years now, working her way up from junior analyst to senior marketing manager through pure hustle and technical savvy. She's brilliant at what she does, always has been. About 2 weeks ago, though, she started acting strange. Not cheating strange, but corporate drone strange. Suddenly, every conversation was about quarterly metrics, brand positioning, and stakeholder synergy. I've been married to this woman for 6 years, and I know when something's off. She'd come home looking drained but weirdly wired, like she'd been mainlining energy drinks and motivational LinkedIn posts all day. Her laptop stayed open constantly, notifications pinging like a slot machine that never paid out. When I'd ask what was going on, she'd give me these vague corporate speak answers about strategic initiatives and market penetration that made my eyes glaze over. There's only so many nights a man can have meaningful conversations with his microwave before questioning his life choices. Then, last Tuesday evening, I borrowed our shared laptop to check my personal email. Rachel had forgotten to close her messaging app, and there it was, a thread with her colleague Sarah from accounting. The preview was enough to make my blood pressure spike, keeping my husband away from company functions. Brandon says deadweight spouses kill the professional vibe. I should have closed it. Should have been the mature husband and walked away. But curiosity has always been my favorite form of self-destruction, so I scrolled up. Rachel had been discussing the rooftop party for our new downtown office opening, specifically how spouses weren't really expected because it was more of a professional networking thing. The kicker was her follow-up message. Brandon made a comment last week about deadweight partners dragging down the energy. I don't want Austin there looking out of place. Now, here's the thing you need to understand about Pierce Cybersecurity. I built this company from scratch 7 years ago, starting as a freelance penetration tester working out of our garage. What began as me finding vulnerabilities in small business networks grew into a 150-employee operation with 3 divisions: corporate security consulting, managed threat detection, and custom software development. We're not some massive corporation, but we're substantial enough that most employees only know me by reputation, if at all. I've always maintained a deliberately low profile. While other tech CEOs are posting thought leadership content and speaking at conferences, I prefer staying in the background, letting division heads like Sandra run day-to-day operations. Rachel works in our marketing division on the 3rd floor. My office is on the executive level, 7th floor. Different elevators, different parking areas, different worlds within the same building. When we got married, Rachel was already establishing her career at a competing firm. She joined Pierce 2 years later when they offered her a senior position she couldn't refuse. I never told her I owned the place because, honestly, I wanted to see how far her talent would take her without any perceived advantages. Call it an experiment in meritocracy, or call it my own twisted version of quality control. Here's the thing about red flags. Most people see them and think, maybe I should proceed with caution and have a mature conversation. Me? I see a red flag and immediately think, challenge accepted. Let's turn this into a social experiment. I made an executive decision right there in our kitchen, laptop still glowing with evidence of my wife's workplace anxiety. I was going to crash this party like an ethical hacker finding vulnerabilities in supposedly secure systems. Because apparently I never learned that curiosity killed the cat. Or maybe I just figured I had 8 lives left and decent health insurance. My assistant Owen caught wind of my plan the next morning when I casually mentioned needing Friday evening free. Owen's one of those millennial organizational wizards who color codes his calendar and has strong opinions about productivity apps. Naturally, his first instinct was to reach for his tablet and start typing formal RSVPs like we were attending a Fortune 500 shareholder meeting. "Sir, I can coordinate with their event team," he said, fingers already dancing over the screen with the enthusiasm of someone who genuinely enjoys administrative tasks. "We should confirm dietary restrictions, parking protocols, and whether you need +1 registration." I looked at him with what I hoped was a mixture of paternal wisdom and barely contained mischief. "No need, Owen," I said, watching his eyebrows perform that betraying dance they do when he's trying to hide concern. "Let's make it a surprise. Nothing says romance like public confusion, and the distinct possibility of security escorting me out in front of my wife's entire professional network. I could see him running probability calculations in his head, weighing scenarios like he was preparing for a cybersecurity incident response. But to his credit, he just sighed, closed the tablet, and muttered something about updating my liability coverage. The thing is, I wasn't doing this just because I missed Rachel, though 3 weeks of her coming home late and being emotionally distant had left me eating takeout alone more times than I cared to admit. No, I was doing this primarily because curiosity has always been my preferred method of chaos management. Some people skydive. Some people buy motorcycles they can't afford. Me? I show up uninvited to corporate events just to see what happens when you introduce an unexpected variable into a perfectly calibrated system. Friday evening, I stood in my closet selecting appropriate camouflage for corporate infiltration. I settled on charcoal gray slacks and a navy blazer, not too flashy, not too casual, the kind of outfit that says, I could either be a client or someone about to serve you with legal documents, and you won't know which until it's too late. Rachel had left an hour earlier, claiming she needed to arrive early for setup coordination, which struck me as suspicious considering she'd never voluntarily shown up early to anything in her entire life, including our wedding. I checked myself in the mirror one last time, adjusted my collar, and couldn't help but grin at my own reflection. Austin, I said to myself, because talking to mirrors is totally normal behavior and definitely not a sign that you should reconsider your evening plans. You're either about to have the most entertaining night of your life, or you're about to become a cautionary tale that Owen tells at team meetings. I grabbed my keys and sent Owen a text that simply read, "Wish me luck." He immediately responded with a gif of a dumpster fire and 3 concerned face emojis, which I chose to interpret as enthusiastic support. The drive downtown gave me too much time to contemplate whether this qualified as healthy relationship behavior, or if I was crossing some invisible line that would eventually require couples therapy and expensive apology flowers. But here's the thing about gut instincts. Sometimes they're just indigestion from questionable food truck choices, and sometimes they're your subconscious screaming that something's fundamentally wrong and you need to pay attention. My gut was currently performing an entire Broadway musical about how something was definitely, absolutely 100% not right with this whole situation. The venue was pure modern pretension, the kind of rooftop setup that screams, "We have venture capital and need everyone to know it," without actually saying it out loud, because that would be gauche. Edison bulb strings hung like technological fairy lights, casting everything in that warm amber glow that makes everyone look like they're starring in a craft beer commercial. The appetizers looked like they'd been designed by architects rather than chefs. Tiny, geometric, and way too aesthetically perfect to actually eat, which was probably the point because Instagram posts don't require taste. Everywhere I looked, people clustered in those awkward corporate formations, holding craft cocktails like props in a play about professional success, laughing at jokes that probably weren't funny, but had been told by someone important enough that laughter was essentially a career investment. The moment I walked onto that rooftop terrace, and I mean the exact microsecond my shoes hit those polished concrete tiles, I could feel the atmospheric pressure drop 3 degrees. You know that sensation when you walk into a room and suddenly realize everyone got a dress code memo that somehow bypassed your inbox? Except, this wasn't about clothing. This was about my entire existence being an unexpected glitch in their carefully programmed evening. Eyes swiveled toward me like security cameras detecting an intrusion. You'd think I'd walked in wearing flip-flops and a stained band t-shirt instead of a perfectly acceptable business casual outfit that probably cost more than half the wardrobes on this rooftop. I spotted Rachel almost immediately because my wife has this distinctive posture that's uniquely hers. Shoulders squared, chin elevated, like she's perpetually prepared to either accept an award or defend her dissertation, depending on the circumstances. She was engaged with a cluster of colleagues from the marketing division, her laugh slightly too loud, slightly too performed, and I felt that familiar pang of something I couldn't quite categorize. Jealousy? Concern? The jury was still deliberating. Before I could navigate over to her, I got intercepted by the man himself. Brandon Walsh spotted me from across the rooftop, with the kind of predatory radar that only middle management develops after years of monitoring employee productivity metrics. He approached with that power walk stride that guy's perfect in front of bathroom mirrors while listening to podcasts about alpha male leadership techniques. His smile was what I can only describe as aggressively cordial, the kind that doesn't quite reach the eyes because the eyes are too busy calculating whether you're useful, irrelevant, or potentially problematic. "You must be Rachel's husband," he said, extending a hand that gripped mine with just enough extra pressure to establish dominance through handshake PSI alone. I smiled back, matching his energy with the kind of pleasant neutrality that drives aggressive personalities absolutely insane. "That's me," I replied, "guilty as charged." He laughed like I'd delivered a punchline, which I hadn't, but I'd learned that powerful people are so accustomed to others laughing at their jokes that they assume everyone else's comments are equally hilarious by default. "You're in tech support, right?" he asked. And there it was. That casual condescension wrapped in a question mark, the verbal equivalent of patting someone on the head while standing on a stepladder. Now, I could have corrected him immediately. Could have dropped the conversational nuclear bomb that would have made his confident smile crack like cheap smartphone glass. But where's the entertainment value in revealing your hand before you've even seen the flop? "Something like that," I replied, keeping my tone light and conversational, like we were discussing weekend plans instead of him casually insulting my professional identity. I solve problems that other people can't figure out. I watched his face perform those micro-expressions, where his brain tried to process whether my response was profound, pretentious, or both, ultimately landing on probably both. But I'll laugh anyway because I'm the alpha here. He chuckled. "Really?" Committed to it, like I delivered the setup to a joke he didn't quite understand but didn't want to admit it. The people in his immediate orbit, his little constellation of corporate yes men and yes women, with their practiced smiles and nervous energy, chuckled too, probably out of that primal fear of unemployment that makes office workers laugh at things that objectively aren't funny. Brandon clapped me on the shoulder with that artificial camaraderie that managers think creates team bonding, but actually just generates resentment. "Well, good for you, buddy," he said, and I despise being called buddy by people who aren't actually my buddies. It's great that Rachel has such a supportive partner who gets that her career takes priority. The way he delivered supportive partner made it sound like a participation trophy, a consolation prize for men who couldn't cut it in the professional arena. I took a sip from a passing Moscow Mule, mostly to occupy my hands with something other than making fists, and surveyed the rooftop with fresh perspective. This wasn't just a party, this was theater, and Brandon was the self-appointed director, moving from group to group like a politician working a campaign rally, ensuring everyone understood he was the gravitational center of this particular universe. As the evening progressed and the craft cocktails flowed like someone had broken open a hipster brewery, Brandon really hit his stride, working the crowd like a game show host who'd forgotten this wasn't actually his show. He launched into this impromptu presentation about the company's expansion, using possessive pronouns with alarming frequency. My team, my vision, my strategic initiatives. He conveniently forgot that his entire operational budget came from a board of directors he'd never actually met face to face. Well, technically, he'd met one of them. He just didn't know it yet, because that particular board member was currently standing 15 feet away, sipping an overpriced cocktail and contemplating whether corporate education via truth-telling counted as a misdemeanor or just quality entertainment. This expansion, Brandon announced to a captive audience of employees who literally couldn't leave without it affecting their performance reviews, represents everything we've accomplished together as a unified team. I nearly choked on my drink at that one, because together was doing some seriously heavy lifting in that sentence. The man had this remarkable gift for making collective achievements sound like personal victories, like he'd single-handedly coded our entire cybersecurity platform while simultaneously managing client relationships and doing his own bookkeeping. But the real showstopper came when he spotted Rachel in the crowd, and his face illuminated like he'd just discovered the secret to perpetual motion. He navigated through the clusters of people with that purposeful stride, and before I could process what was happening, he'd wrapped an arm around my wife's shoulder with a casualness that made my left eye develop an involuntary twitch. "She's our most valuable asset," he proclaimed loudly enough that half the rooftop turned to observe. "You should feel lucky she married up." Now, let me tell you something about that phrase, married up. It's one of those supposedly complimentary statements that's actually just an insult wearing formal attire and pretending to be polite. It implies hierarchy, a ranking system, a social ladder where one person is objectively superior to the other. And in this particular case, Brandon was heavily suggesting that my wife had climbed said ladder by marrying me, which theoretically positioned him at the peak of this metaphorical mountain. I sipped my Moscow Mule slowly, purchasing myself exactly 3 seconds to decide whether I was going to let this slide or whether I was about to light matches in this powder keg of a conversation. Spoiler alert, I've never been particularly skilled at letting things slide. "Oh, I'm extremely fortunate," I said, my voice dripping with the kind of sweetness that typically precedes incoming sarcasm. "Some people climb ladders, others just stand at the top and take credit for the view." The air around us thickened enough to cut with a server blade. That special kind of tension that occurs when someone says something that could be interpreted as either philosophical wisdom or a direct personal attack. Brandon's face embarked on this fascinating journey of expressions. First confusion, then a flicker of suspicion that maybe I'd just insulted him, but he couldn't quite decode how, and finally landing on that artificial laugh people deploy when they're not sure if they should be offended. Rachel was performing this thing, where she smiled while simultaneously looking like she wanted the rooftop to open up and swallow her whole, which I recognized as her "my husband is causing a scene" expression. I'd seen it before at dinner parties, family reunions, and that memorable occasion at Best Buy when I got into a technical debate with the Geek Squad. I positioned myself strategically near the appetizer station, partly because I was genuinely hungry after skipping dinner, in my excitement to infiltrate this corporate gathering, and partly because the food table offered excellent reconnaissance positioning without looking like a creep. The salmon tartare was actually impressive, definitely not the frozen garbage you encounter at budget conferences. While contemplating whether it would be socially acceptable to establish permanent residence next to the smoked salmon, I became acutely aware that I'd become the focal point of several whispered conversations happening at various coordinates around the rooftop. You know that sensation when you can't hear exactly what people are saying, but you can feel the weight of their speculation pressing against your skull like atmospheric pressure before a storm? Employees were directing these sideways glances in my direction that they thought were subtle but were about as discreet as air raid sirens. I caught fragments of conversations as people migrated past the food station. "That's her husband," one woman in a charcoal blazer whispered to her colleague, her tone suggesting she'd expected someone either significantly more impressive or significantly less threatening. "He seems normal," another guy added, and I wasn't sure if that qualified as a compliment or an insult. Brandon, because the universe has a sense of humor, and that sense of humor runs primarily on irony, decided this was the optimal moment to make another appearance in my evening. He strutted over with the confidence of a peacock, who just discovered Instagram filters, stopping when he saw me, his face performing that calculation where he was clearly trying to remember if he'd already interrogated me about my career, or if all unimportant people just blurred together in his mental database. "So, what exactly do you do for work?" He snapped his fingers like that would somehow summon my professional details from the void, which was particularly rich considering he'd already asked me this exact question 30 minutes earlier. "Austin," I supplied helpfully, popping another piece of salmon into my mouth, because if I was going to be cross-examined about my career choices, I was at least going to do it while consuming expensive catering. And I specialize in cybersecurity. You could say I protect people's most valuable digital assets. I kept my tone conversational, like I was discussing a hobby rather than a multi-million-dollar business portfolio. "Oh, like IT support?" he asked, and there it was again. That voice that could make even genuine questions sound patronizing. He said IT support, the way someone might say adorable, while watching a puppy struggle with basic motor functions. "More like entire network infrastructures," I replied casually, reaching for a napkin because salmon tartare is delicious but messy. "I build the systems that keep companies from getting hacked by teenagers in their parents' basements." I delivered it with the same energy someone might use to correct a minor factual error, giving no indication that I'd just dropped information that should have made his brain perform emergency recalculations about our respective professional standings. He laughed again, and at this point I was beginning to suspect that Brandon just laughed at everything as a defensive mechanism, like a nervous tick disguised as social confidence. "Well, good for you," he said, loud enough that several nearby conversations paused to eavesdrop. "Must be nice having a wife who brings home the serious money while you tinker with computers." He delivered it with that particular brand of condescension that implied I was some sort of kept man, probably spending my days playing video games and living off Rachel's salary like a professional house husband who'd given up on actual ambition. "Yeah," I said, my smile expanding because I could feel the punchline building in my chest like pressure in a steam engine. "She really runs this place." I let those words hang in the atmosphere, perfectly ambiguous, technically accurate in multiple ways that Brandon's brain was definitely not processing because he was too busy savoring what he thought was validation of his assessment of our marriage dynamics. Rachel coughed into her wine glass across the rooftop, a sound I recognized as her, "Oh God, what is he doing now?" cough, the same one she'd made when I'd started explaining blockchain technology to her mother at Thanksgiving. Halfway through the evening, when the craft cocktails had sufficiently dissolved everyone's professional facades and the rooftop had reached that perfect level of corporate buzz, Brandon decided it was time for a toast. Because of course he did. You can't have a party celebrating Pierce cybersecurity without Brandon making a speech about Brandon thinly disguised as appreciation for everyone else's contributions. He tapped a bottle opener against his beer glass with theatrical flair that suggested he'd been rehearsing this moment in his bathroom mirror for weeks. The sound cut through conversations like a notification alert, and everyone obediently ceased talking and pivoted toward him with that expectant silence that happens when the boss demands attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," Brandon boomed, his voice adopting that motivational speaker quality that sounds like he'd been studying TED Talks about leadership. He raised his glass high, craft beer sloshing dangerously close to the rim. "Let's toast to success and to the support of partners who stay home and let us shine in the professional arena." He delivered that final line with a theatrical wink and a gesture in my general direction, like he was bestowing some great honor by acknowledging my existence in front of his captive audience. The rooftop erupted in laughter, that specific variety of obligatory office laughter that sounds less like genuine amusement and more like a survival instinct. People raised their glasses dutifully, their smiles performing the social equivalent of security theater. I raised my own glass slowly, deliberately, with the kind of casual confidence that comes from knowing something everyone else doesn't. The movement caught Brandon's attention, and I saw his face light up with what he probably interpreted as camaraderie. "Cheers to leaders who mistake delegation for achievement," I announced, my voice carrying across the rooftop with crystal clarity. I paused for exactly one beat, but I'm afraid company policy prohibits fiction in public statements. The rooftop transitioned from polite corporate laughter to absolutely deafening silence in approximately half a second. Then gradually, genuine laughter began rippling through the crowd, not that manufactured office laughter from before, but authentic amusement from people who'd probably been waiting months for someone to publicly challenge Brandon's self-congratulatory leadership theater. Brandon's face embarked on this remarkable evolution of expressions. First came confusion, then dawning realization, and his face began flushing that particular shade of red that occurs when someone's blood pressure spikes and their ego sustains direct damage simultaneously. "So, Austin," he said, my name dripping with newfound hostility. "How does it feel being married to the real breadwinner in the family?" I grinned at him with the kind of smile that probably should have come with a warning label. "Absolutely delicious," I said, "especially since the bread comes from my bakery." "Sorry, what?" Brandon said, his aggressive confidence faltering like a computer system, experiencing critical errors. I turned towards Sandra, our CFO, who had been observing quietly from a nearby table. "Sandra," I called out, loud enough that everyone could hear clearly, "could you retrieve those quarterly reports, the ones you and I signed when we approved Brandon's departmental budget last month?" "Certainly, sir," she said, and that single word dropped into the conversation like a tactical nuclear device. "Mr. Pierce," Brandon repeated, his voice cracking. "Wait, Pierce? Like Pierce Cybersecurity?" "Exactly," I confirmed, standing slowly. "I'm Austin Pierce. I'm the founder and primary stakeholder of this company. You've been working for me, Brandon." The reaction was instantaneous. Gasps rolled through the crowd, like spectators witnessing an impossible play. Smartphones appeared with remarkable speed. Brandon stammered, "You're joking. You can't be serious." "Wouldn't that be convenient?" I said calmly. "You've undermined your team, misallocated company resources, and publicly insulted my wife. Not exactly exemplary leadership performance." His face drained to sickly green. "But by Monday morning, I want your resignation letter on my desk. 1 page, professionally formatted, full of those buzzword phrases you're so fond of using." "I think," Sandra announced, "that concludes tonight's entertainment." I walked toward the exit, accompanied by scattered applause. Real applause. The cool night air felt better than anything inside that venue. The next week brought chaos and normalcy. Rachel and I had our pancake breakfast conversation, where she apologized, and I acknowledged I should have given her warning. By Thursday, Sandra was officially promoted to CEO. That evening, I found Rachel reading on our couch. "Next time you attend one of my work events," I said, "remember that I'm the one who approves the catering budget." She groaned, half annoyed and half amused. "You're permanently banned. I'm putting your photograph at security checkpoints." "Too late," I pointed out. "I own the security system, too." She threw a couch cushion at my head. I caught it easily. And in that moment, with my wife laughing and the professional chaos finally settling into manageable routine, I realized something important about the nature of revenge. Revenge isn't always loud and destructive. Sometimes it's about appearing exactly when nobody expects you, refusing to make yourself smaller, standing in a room full of people who underestimate you, and letting them discover slowly, painfully, that they never understood who they were dealing with. Sometimes revenge is quiet, calculated, and precisely timed. It's being consistently underestimated, then revealing you're the person who signs the paychecks, owns the building, and approves the catering budget. And if that makes me petty, fine. I'm a petty man with a successful company, a wife who only mostly wants to murder me, and a framed laminated copy of Brandon's resignation letter hanging in my office. I can absolutely live with that.